The 17th of December, 1944. Hansfeld, Belgium. The Tiger tank's engine sputtered and died in the pre-dawn frost. Stranding SS Oberscharführer Joachim Peiper's elite Kampfgruppe in the snowy Ardennes, his fist slammed the turret, the clang echoing like a death knell across the silent forest. Around him, 67 tanks and 5,000 Waffen SS soldiers stood paralyzed, their war machines useless without fuel. Through the mist, Peiper saw it, an abandoned American depot, jerry cans gleaming like a gift from a mocking god. 50,000 gallons of gasoline, more than most German divisions saw in months, lay unguarded, coffee cups still steaming from the Americans' hasty retreat. Yet, as his men poured the precious fuel into their tanks, a chilling truth settled over Peiper. If the Americans could abandon such wealth without a fight, what unimaginable power did they wield? This was no mere supply dump. It was a glimpse into an industrial machine that Germany could never match. By evening, as flames devoured 2 million gallons at Stavelot, Peiper understood. They weren't fighting a war, they were facing an execution. In the Ardennes, the Third Reich's last gamble would drown in oceans of American abundance. Part 1. The Stalled Spearhead. The 17th of December, 1944, 0530 hours, Hansfeld, Belgium. The bitter cold of the Ardennes forest clawed at the steel hull of the Tiger tank, its 700 horsepower Maybach engine coughing, sputtering, then falling silent. SS Oberscharführer Joachim Peiper slammed his fist against the turret hatch, the metallic clang slicing through the pre-dawn darkness like a gunshot. Inside, his driver, Unterscharführer Hans Weber, wrestled with the controls, his breath visible in the cramped, icy compartment. He tried the starter again, nothing. The fuel gauge needle sat, mocking them at empty. Herr Oberscharführer, Weber called up, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The reserve tank is dry too. Peiper's jaw clenched as he climbed down, his boots crunching into the frozen Belgian soil, the air sharp with frost, and the acrid tang of diesel fumes lingering from the stalled column. The 17th of December, 1944, 0530 hours, Hansfeld, Belgium. The bitter cold of the Ardennes forest clawed at the steel hull of the Tiger tank, its 700 horsepower Maybach engine coughing, sputtering, then falling silent. SS Oberscharführer Joachim Peiper slammed his fist against the turret hatch, the metallic clang slicing through the pre-dawn darkness like a gunshot. Inside, his driver, Unterscharführer Hans Weber, wrestled with the controls, his breath visible in the cramped, icy compartment. He tried the starter again, nothing. The fuel gauge needle sat, mocking them at empty. Herr Oberscharführer, Weber called up, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The reserve tank is dry too. Peiper's jaw clenched as he climbed down, his boots crunching into the frozen Belgian soil, the air sharp with frost, and the acrid tang of diesel fumes lingering from the stalled column. Through the morning mist, ghostly and thick, Peiper's eyes caught a faint glow ahead. Hansfeld, a critical supply depot abandoned by the U.S. 99th Infantry Division. The Americans had fled in such haste that fire still flickered in oil drums, their warmth mocking the shivering Germans. Metal coffee cups, steam still rising, lay scattered on crates, as if the GIs had vanished mid-sip. Peiper's heart quickened as he approached, his boots sinking into the frosted mud. There, like a vision from some ancient myth, stood rows upon rows of olive-drab jerry cans, thousands of them, glinting faintly in the dawn's first light. His adjutant, Hauptsturmführer Hans Gruller, pried open a can, the sharp scent of high-octane gasoline cutting through the chill. "Benzin," Gruller whispered, almost reverently. "American fuel, 80 octane or higher." Peiper's men swarmed the depot, their exhaustion replaced by a frantic energy. They hauled cans to the tanks, the slosh of fuel, a lifeline to their stalled offensive. Peiper walked among the stockpile, counting, his mind racing with the mathematics of survival. 50,000 gallons, enough to fuel his entire Kampfgruppe to the Meuse River, perhaps enough to shift the tide of this faltering campaign. The numbers were staggering. This single depot held more fuel than most German divisions had seen in 6 months. Yet, as he watched his men pour American gasoline into German tanks, a shadow fell over him, colder than the Ardennes winter. The Americans had abandoned this bounty without a fight, leaving behind what Germany would have guarded with entire divisions. If they could afford such waste, what did that mean for the Reich? The question hung in the air, heavy as the fog, a whisper of the industrial chasm that would soon swallow Germany's hopes. Part 2. The American Abundance. As the first rays of dawn pierced the Ardennes mist, Peiper's eyes widened at the sight before him, the abandoned American position at Hansfeld, a forward supply depot for the U.S. 99th Infantry Division. The scene was almost surreal, a snapshot of hasty retreat frozen in time, oil drums still crackling with dying fires, their heat a cruel tease to the frostbitten Germans. Metal cups of coffee, black and steaming, perched on overturned crates as if the GIs might return any moment. Peiper's men, hardened veterans of the Eastern Front, paused in awe, their breaths forming clouds in the frigid air. For months, they had scraped by on meager drips of synthetic fuel, rationing every liter like precious blood, while here lay an unguarded treasure, a godsend from the chaos of war. Peiper approached slowly, almost reverently, his pulse quickening with a mix of disbelief and desperate hope. His adjutant, Hauptsturmführer Hans Gruller, knelt beside one of the distinctive olive-drab jerry cans, prying it open with a bayonet. The sharp, clean scent of high-octane gasoline wafted up benzene, purer and more potent than anything the Wehrmacht had touched in ages. "Herr Oberscharführer," Gruller exclaimed, his voice cracking with rare excitement. "It's aviation grade mixed with motor fuel, 80 octane or higher." The men erupted in hushed cheers, a wave of relief washing over their weary faces. One sergeant clasped his hands as if in prayer, whispering thanks for this miracle amid the snow-dusted pines. They had endured bombed-out refineries back home, where fuel was guarded like gold, yet here the Americans had left pyramids of cans stacked 3 meters high, stretching perhaps 200 meters across the clearing, a chaotic bounty that mocked Germany's meticulous scarcity. Frantic hands set to work refueling the vehicles, the glug of pouring gasoline, a symphony of revival for the stalled Tiger tanks and half-tracks. Peiper moved among the stockpile, his mind calculating the windfall, 50,000 gallons, enough to propel his entire Kampfgruppe toward the Meuse River, enough to potentially alter the offensive's faltering momentum. This wasn't just fuel, it was a lifeline, more than most German divisions had received in the past 6 months combined. But as the engines began to rumble back to life, a shadow crossed Peiper's features. His men, buoyed by the discovery, shared stories of their own deprivations, tanks abandoned on the Russian steppes for want of a single drum, families back home reverting to bicycles and horses. Yet the Americans had fled without even attempting to destroy this hoard, leaving it like discarded scraps. If they could abandon such quantities without a backward glance, what unimaginable reserves did they hold? The thought gnawed at him, a quiet thunder building in the distance, hinting at the vast, unbridgeable gulf between the Reich's desperation and the Allies' effortless plenty. Part 3. Germany's Fuel Crisis. 6 months before Peiper's fateful discovery at Hansfeld, in June 1944, Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, had delivered a report to the Führer that should have halted all offensive dreams in their tracks. The document painted a grim portrait of Germany's crumbling fuel infrastructure, the very lifeblood of the Wehrmacht, ravaged by relentless Allied bombing campaigns. Synthetic fuel production, once the Reich's ingenious workaround to its lack of natural oil reserves, was in freefall. The Leuna works, which had churned out 175,000 tons in April, limped along at a mere 5,000 tons by September. The hydrogenation plants at Politz, Bleckhammer, and Brooks operated at less than 10% capacity, their smokestacks silenced by the thunder of B-17 seconds and Lancasters overhead. Speer's figures weren't just statistics, they were a death knell, foretelling inevitable defeat in a war of machines. The disparity was staggering, a chasm that no amount of German ingenuity could bridge. In 1944 alone, the United States pumped out 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil, flooding its armies with petroleum abundance, while Germany, Scraping together synthetic output and captured Romanian fields, managed a paltry 33 million barrels, less than 2% of American production. The Third Reich was waging mechanized warfare with the logistics of a bygone era, relying on horse-drawn carts where tanks should roar. Major Friedrich Seemann of the Wehrmacht's Logistics Command had calculated that the Ardennes offensive would demand 4.5 million gallons to reach Antwerp. Hitler promised 5 million, but transportation woes delivered only half. The High Command's strategy hinged on capturing enemy supplies, a gamble that screamed weakness rather than resolve. On the home front, the crisis seeped into every corner of civilian life, a silent erosion that fueled whispers of doubt among the troops. Soldiers like Private Ernst Kara, writing hurried letters from the front, heard tales from their families, farmers abandoning tractors for horse-drawn plows, the rhythmic clop of hooves replacing the hum of engines on rural roads, city streets eerily empty of private automobiles since 1942, with gasoline so scarce that the Gestapo hunted black market thieves over single liters. Speer, in a tense Berlin bunker meeting, had laid it all bare before Hitler, his voice steady but urgent, pleading for a defensive pivot. Mein Führer, he urged, charts trembling in his hands, we cannot sustain another push. The bombs have crippled us. But Hitler, eyes blazing with denial, dismissed the warnings, clinging to fantasies of wonder weapons and unbreakable will. The desperation in the High Command's corridors was palpable, a heavy fog of resignation among aides who knew the arithmetic of doom but dared not speak it aloud. As Peiper's men savored their Hansfeld Windfall, this backdrop loomed like a gathering storm. The Reich's fuel famine, not just a logistical failure, but a harbinger of collapse against an enemy whose wells seemed bottomless. Part 4. The Ardennes Plan and its Flaws. On the 14th of December, 1944, 2 days before the Ardennes offensive was set to unleash its fury, Joachim Peiper sat in a dimly lit command post in Tondorf, his face etched with the weight of what was to come. The final briefing for Operation Watch on the Rhine was underway, and General Sepp Dietrich, commander of the 6th SS Panzer Army, delivered his orders with a bluntness that cut through the room's stale air. "You will have enough fuel to reach the Meuse if you capture American supplies," Dietrich declared, his voice a mix of defiance and grim necessity. Peiper's Kampfgruppe, designated the Schwerpunkt, the decisive spearhead of the entire offensive, was allocated a mere 31,000 gallons of fuel, enough for just 50 miles of combat operations. The Meuse River, their objective, lay 65 miles away. The mathematics of failure were baked into the plan from the start, a cruel equation that Peiper, at 29, one of the youngest regimental commanders in the Waffen-SS, could not ignore. As he stood among his officers, the flickering lantern light casting long shadows on the map-strewn table, Peiper's mind churned with doubts. A veteran of the Eastern Front, he had seen tanks grind to a halt for want of fuel, entire offensives unraveling in the Russian mud. Now, in the dense, snow-choked Ardennes, the terrain promised even greater challenges: narrow lanes mislabeled as highways on German maps, muddy ruts that would swallow axles whole. He turned to Hauptsturmführer Hans Gruller, his trusted adjutant, and muttered, "This plan bets everything on miracles we cannot afford." Gruller nodded silently, his eyes reflecting the same unspoken fear. Capturing enemy fuel was no strategy, it was a prayer. Peiper issued strict orders to conserve their meager resources. Tanks would move single file to stretch every drop. Engines would shut off during halts longer than 5 minutes. Capturing American fuel dumps was priority one, trumping even tactical objectives. The contrast with the Americans was already stark. Just 20 miles away, Captain James Rose of the U.S. 743rd Tank Battalion scribbled in his unit diary that same morning, "Received fuel resupply, 8,000 gallons, third delivery this week. Storage tanks at capacity." The Americans were drowning in fuel, their supply lines a relentless artery of abundance, while Peiper's men prepared to roll the dice on a desperate gamble. In the quiet before the offensive, as his crew checked their Tigers under a gray Belgian sky, Peiper's thoughts drifted to the Eastern Front, where fuel shortages had cost him comrades in battles. The Ardennes, he feared, would demand an even steeper price. The muddy, twisting paths ahead, barely wide enough for a single tank, seemed a whisper of coming ruin. each rut a reminder that Germany's war machine was running on fumes and fading hope. Part 5. The Opening Barrage. The 16th of December, 1944, 0530 hours. The Ardennes forest erupted as German artillery unleashed a thunderous barrage, signaling the start of Operation Watch on the Rhine. Shells screamed through the pre-dawn darkness, a 2-hour inferno that consumed more ammunition than the Wehrmacht had allocated for entire operations earlier in the war. Yet even this display masked a crippling truth. Germany's reserves were dwindling, and every shell fired was one less for the days ahead. Joachim Peiper's Kampfgruppe, the spearhead of the 6th SS Panzer Army, began its advance at 0700, already behind schedule. The roads, optimistically marked as highways on German maps, revealed themselves as narrow, winding country lanes, many unpaved and churned to mud by early winter rains. Tanks designed for the vast Russian steppes lurched and groaned through the dense Ardennes forest, their treads clawing at the sodden earth. Within hours, chaos set in. Traffic jams snarled the advance as Peiper's column, 67 tanks and 149 half-tracks, struggled along paths barely wide enough for a single vehicle. The air grew thick with diesel fumes and the curses of frustrated crews, their heavy tigers slipping in the mud, burning precious fuel just to stay mobile. At Lanzerath, their first objective, Peiper's forces slammed into unexpected resistance from a single American intelligence and reconnaissance platoon, just 18 men, dug in with grim determination. For nearly 10 hours, this tiny unit held up the mightiest German armored column, their machine guns spitting defiance from a forested ridge. Peiper, pacing beside his command tank, barked orders over the radio, his voice sharp with impatience as the delay bled his fuel reserves dry. The tanks sat idling, each minute guzzling gasoline that could not be spared. By the time they broke through, the column had burned through 40% of its fuel to cover just 20 miles. The men, bundled in greatcoats against the biting cold, exchanged weary glances, their faces smudged with mud and exhaustion. Peiper's mind flashed back to the Eastern Front, where fuel shortages had stranded his tanks in the snow, leaving comrades to freeze or fall to Soviet guns. "We cannot afford this," he snapped to a nearby officer, his breath a white plume in the chill air. The Ardennes terrain, with its steep hills and tangled underbrush, was a far cry from the open plains he knew, and every mile felt like a betrayal of their dwindling resources. The American resistance, though small, was a grim omen. If 18 men could stall them this long, what awaited at Hansfeld? As the column inched forward, the rumble of engines mixed with the distant crack of gunfire, a reminder that each drop of fuel burned brought them closer to a reckoning, one that Germany's high command had gambled on capturing from the enemy they underestimated. Part 6. Hansfeld's Revelation. By dawn on the 17th of December, 1944, Joachim Peiper's beleaguered Kampfgruppe finally rolled into Hansfeld, their tanks coughing on the last fumes of fuel. The sight that greeted them was nothing short of miraculous. An abandoned American supply depot, its treasures laid bare in the pale morning light. Rows of olive-drab jerry cans stretched across the clearing, a staggering 50,000 gallons of high-octane gasoline left behind by the fleeing U.S. 99th Infantry Division. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffman, a former clerk in his father's import business, stumbled upon shipping manifests in the depot's cluttered office. His English, rusty but serviceable, revealed a staggering truth. This fuel had traveled over 6,000 miles from Texas to New York, across the Atlantic to Liverpool, then through Normandy's battered ports to this muddy Belgian outpost, all in under 6 weeks. Peiper, clutching the crumpled papers, read them twice, his face paling as the implications sank in. He stepped outside, the air heavy with the sharp tang of gasoline and the faint smoke of still smoldering oil drums. "This is impossible," he murmured to Hauptsturmführer Hans Gruller, his voice low, as if speaking the thought aloud might make it real. "They move oceans of fuel while we beg for drops." Gruller, his hands stained from prying open cans, nodded grimly, his eyes scanning the surreal abundance coffee cups, still warm. Scattered Stars and Stripes newspapers boasting of new pipelines, their headlines a mocking testament to American might. The depot wasn't even a primary facility, just a temporary Class 3B station, yet it held more fuel than an entire German panzer division's monthly allocation. Peiper's men, their initial elation fading, worked in a frenzied silence, pouring the precious liquid into their tanks, the slosh of fuel, a fleeting promise of momentum. The discovery was a knife's edge of hope and despair. The American gasoline, 80 octane or higher, was too rich for the Tiger's Maybach engines, designed for 74 octane, causing sputters and stalls in some vehicles. Yet the real blow was psychological. Hoffman, clutching a 2-day-old newspaper, read aloud a headline about a new pipeline from Cherbourg to Verdun, capable of delivering 300,000 gallons daily, more than Peiper's entire offensive would consume. The men around him fell silent, their gaunt faces reflecting a shared realization. This wasn't just a depot, it was a glimpse into an industrial machine that dwarfed their own. Peiper, staring at the endless rows of cans, felt the weight of a war already lost. The Reich's desperation laid bare against an enemy who could abandon such wealth without a second thought. The fuel was a lifeline, but the papers in his hand were a death sentence, whispering of a power Germany could neither match nor comprehend. Part 7. The Stavelot Disaster. By noon on the 17th of December 1944, Joachim Peiper's Kampfgruppe, fueled by the Hansfeld Windfall, pushed towards Stavelot, their hopes pinned on capturing another American supply depot rumored to hold over 2 million gallons of gasoline, enough to carry them to the Meuse River and beyond. But as their tanks rumbled through the snowy Ardennes, a distant roar stopped them cold. A pillar of black smoke rose 1,000 feet into the sky, blotting out the winter Sunday. The Stavelot depot, sprawling across 15 acres with jerry cans stacked like monuments, was an inferno. American engineers, led by Captain John Brewster of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, had received word of the German advance. Their orders were uncompromising: deny fuel to the enemy at all costs. Brewster, his face streaked with sweat despite the freezing air, had made the call with a heavy heart. "Light it up," he barked, his voice steady but his eyes betraying the weight of sacrificing such wealth. His men poured trails of gasoline between the stacks, the liquid glinting like liquid gold in the pale light. Technical Sergeant Paul Solis tossed the first white phosphorus grenade, and the explosion was cataclysmic. A wall of fire shot up, maybe 100 feet. The heat so intense it drove back the advancing Germans. Within minutes, the entire depot was a roaring hellscape, consuming 2,189,000 gallons of fuel, enough to have powered Peiper's division to Antwerp and back. The fire burned for 3 days, its black smoke a grim beacon visible for miles, a testament to American resolve. Peiper stood atop his command tank, motionless, watching the flames devour what he had gambled everything to seize. Oberscharführer Hans Weber, his driver, later recalled the silence that gripped their leader. He said nothing for perhaps 5 minutes, just stared. Then he climbed down and muttered, "They can afford to burn 2 million gallons to deny us. What are we doing here?" The question hung in the air, heavy with defeat. For Peiper's men, the sight was a gut punch. Private Ernst Kara, his hands still greasy from refueling at Hansfeld, whispered to a comrade, "We'd kill for a single can, and they torch millions." The flames illuminated their weary faces, reflecting not just the fire but the dawning realization of their futility. Across the Ardennes, American engineers were torching other depots, 1.1 million gallons at Thuin, 2.5 million at Spa, destroying over 8 million gallons in a week, more than Germany had allocated for the entire offensive. The act was not just tactical, it was a statement of industrial might, a deliberate flex of abundance that shattered German morale. As the inferno raged, Peiper's dream of reaching the Meuse flickered out, consumed by the same flames that lit up the truth. The Reich was fighting a war it could never win. Part 8. The American Logistical Machine. The flames of Stavelot still burned in Joachim Peiper's mind as his Kampfgruppe pressed deeper into the Ardennes. But the American logistical machine they faced was a juggernaut beyond comprehension. By December 1944, the U.S. supply system operated with a precision and abundance that mocked Germany's scavenged existence. The Red Ball Express, a colossal convoy of 6,000 trucks, roared across France, delivering 12,500 tons of supplies daily to the front, including 3,000 tons of fuel. Each truck guzzled 40 gallons a day, burning more fuel in a single operation than German Army Group B received monthly. Operation PLUTO pipeline under the ocean pumped 1 million gallons daily across the English Channel, with lines like the Cherbourg-Paris route delivering 800,000 gallons and the Seine line adding 650,000 more. Allied forces in Northwest Europe consumed 7.5 million gallons daily while receiving 8.2 million, stockpiling reserves even during offensive operations. Across the lines, Private First Class Leroy Jackson, a Red Ball Express driver, gripped the wheel of his GMC truck, pride swelling as he hauled jerry cans through the snow-dusted French countryside. "We keep the tanks rolling, the planes flying," he'd later write home, his words brimming with the confidence of a system that never faltered. His convoy, stretching miles along color-coded routes, was a lifeline that Peiper's men could only dream of, a relentless pulse of fuel, food, and ammunition that powered the Allied advance. Meanwhile, German logistics clung to horse-drawn carts and sporadic rail deliveries, crippled by Allied air raids. The contrast was stark. American abundance flowed like a river. German scarcity trickled like a dying stream. Peiper's despair deepened when his radio operator intercepted an American transmission, a casual report from a U.S. First Army logistics officer. Fuel reserves at 3.5 million gallons, expecting 1.8 million more tomorrow. The numbers struck like a blow. Hauptsturmführer Hans Gruller, overhearing, shook his head, muttering, "They talk of millions while we count liters." The American system wasn't just about quantity, it was efficiency. Standardized Sherman tanks sipped 0.8 gallons per mile, while Peiper's Tigers gulped 2.5. U.S. trucks, interchangeable and reliable, got 8 miles per gallon fully loaded, while German forces juggled a chaotic mix of captured French tanks and Soviet trucks, each demanding different parts and oils. The intercepted message, crackling through the cold Ardennes air, was a taunt, a reminder of the industrial chasm Peiper faced. His men, rationing every drop, could only marvel at an enemy who measured fuel not in cans but in oceans. Their pipelines and convoys, a testament to a war machine that operated on a scale Germany could neither match nor imagine. As the column lurched forward, the weight of that truth settled heavier than the snow, signaling a fight not just against soldiers, but against an unstoppable tide of resources. Part 9. The Collapse of the Offensive. By the 19th of December 1944, Joachim Peiper's Kampfgruppe was unraveling, its advance through the Ardennes choked by a relentless fuel crisis. The offensive's momentum had evaporated, leaving tanks stranded with empty fuel gauges rather than battle damage. Peiper's forces had consumed 67,000 gallons since December 16, capturing only 55,000 from American depots, a deficit that spelled doom. At Stoumont, his column clashed with determined defenders, burning through fuel at a terrifying rate. Tiger tanks guzzled 2.5 gallons per mile in combat. Panthers, 1.5, with the rugged Ardennes terrain inflating consumption by 40%. Hauptsturmführer Otto Dingler, maintenance officer for the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, recorded the grim tally. "We're running at a loss, bleeding fuel faster than we can steal it." By now, Peiper consolidated his remaining 8,000 gallons, enough for one last push or a retreat, but not both. American Ultra intercepts, decoding German radio traffic, confirmed his desperation, prompting General Courtney Hodges to order all units. Enemy critically short of fuel. Destroy all gasoline stocks threatened by capture. The psychological toll was crushing. Private Ernst Kara, scribbling a letter home in the dim light of a halted half-track, wrote, "We abandon tanks not because they're broken, but because they're dry. The Americans burn what we'd die for." His words, smuggled past censors, echoed the despair spreading through the ranks. Peiper, his face haggard under the weight of command, gathered his officers at dusk on December 19. "We push on with what we have," he ordered, his voice flat, betraying the futility he felt. Sternbannführer Werner Puchki was blunt. "We have fuel for 20 kilometers. The Meuse is 30 away." The men knew the truth. Each captured depot, like the 5,000 gallons at Shower, was a drop against the American deluge. That same day, American C-47 seconds flew 316 sorties to Bastogne, delivering 160,000 gallons of fuel to a surrounded garrison, more than Peiper's entire force possessed. As tanks were abandoned in the snow, their crews trudging through the cold, the contrast was stark. Across the lines, American forces operated with effortless mobility. The 31st Infantry Division, 82nd Airborne, and 3rd Armored, encircling Peiper, had a combined fuel allocation of 340,000 gallons for December 21 alone. Peiper's men, meanwhile, siphoned the last drops from their vehicles, their dreams of victory buried under the weight of Allied abundance. Kara's letter ended with a bitter reflection. "We thought we were the master race, but they drown us in fuel and chocolate." The offensive's collapse wasn't just logistical, it was a shattering of illusions. Each empty tank, a monument to a war Germany could no longer fight, against an enemy whose resources seemed infinite. Part 10. The Lasting Impact. The 24th of December, 1944. As Joachim Peiper's men slipped through American lines on foot, abandoning 39 operational tanks and 70 half-tracks in the snow, the Ardennes offensive's failure crystallized into a monument of defeat. The Tiger tanks of Kampfgruppe Peiper, once the Reich's pride, sat immobilized, not by enemy fire but by empty fuel tanks, a bitter irony captured in the L'Église Museum, where one such Tiger remains today, its gauge frozen at zero, a silent testament to logistical doom. Peiper himself survived, imprisoned until 1956 for war crimes, including the Malmedy massacre, but the psychological scars ran deeper. In 1967, he told historian Henry Lehman, "Finding that Hansfeld depot was the worst thing. If we'd run out earlier, we might have retreated with dignity. Instead, we discovered Americans had oceans, while we had drops we discovered impossibility." The realization spread like wildfire through German command. Field Marshal Walter Model, reading reports of 50,000 gallons at Hansfeld and 2 million burned at Stavelot, stared at the figures twice before muttering, "We are not fighting the same war." General Heinz Guderian later wrote that Peiper's capture, miraculous to Germans but trivial to Americans, marked the war's end. At Nuremberg, German leaders from Keitel to Donitz cited fuel logistics as decisive, their operational brilliance of 1,940 rendered moot by 1,944's industrial disparity. America produced 50% of global manufacturing, refining 1.8 billion barrels of oil against Germany's 33 million, a 50-to-1 petroleum chasm no tactics could bridge. Peiper's story resonates as industrial warfare's grim conclusion, where factories trump courage and abundance crush dedication. Dr. Richard Overy's calculations reveal Allied to Axis production ratios exceeding 5-to-1 across categories, with petroleum nearing 50-to-1 advantages that rendered German training irrelevant. In 1984, veterans gathered at L'Église. Former Unterscharführer Karl Wortmann stood beside American Staff Sergeant Roy Anderson by the abandoned Tiger. "We always wondered why you stopped," Anderson said. "We thought it was tactical." Wortmann laughed bitterly. "Tanks were empty. You burned millions to keep it from us. How could we fight that?" Anderson fell quiet, then replied, "We had so much we never thought about it." That exchange encapsulated December 1944's truth. One side measured victory in oceans of fuel, the other defeat in empty jerry cans. The Ardennes wasn't just a battle lost, it was the moment romantic warfare died, replaced by the cold mathematics of production, where Germany's finest met America's factories and found only ashes. Please press like and subscribe to the channel, or wait for my latest video.